Many thanks, Brother Tom, and thank you for that reading, and good afternoon to everybody. Shortly I'm going to be speaking on, well now in actual fact, this topic of preaching tool. And this all came about because I think it must have been more than 10 years ago that Brother Keith Archer at the time asked me if I'd like to do a talk for Bible class. And I agreed, and this was essentially the talk that I prepared. So I'm not sure, but there's a good chance this was the first talk I ever prepared, for like a Bible class or for the meeting full stop. And I remember when I was thinking about preparing this talk, I thought, oh, good grief, what should I do? And my thoughts at the time were, well, let's do something which is really quite simple. And I was thinking about the sort of things that I liked, and I always liked it when speakers use visual aids. And for that reason alone, it's why I chose to use a PowerPoint for this presentation. Now, as well as visual aids, I like anything that aids my ability to remember things or make things simpler and easier. And this is what this presentation is largely about. What we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to consider a preaching tool, and this is to help us remember and express a whole bunch of things about the faith that we have. I remember just prior to working on this talk, I was having some fun with acronyms and abbreviations. And an acronym is a word formed essentially by using the initial letters of a phrase or title. So let me show you what I mean by using the Grinch as an example. Now, I know my kids know what the Grinch are, and the Grinch tends to feature around this time each year. The Grinch is a book by Dr. Seuss, and it's also a movie. And like I say, if you look on TV magazines around this time of year, you might well see the movie being played soon. And so, the Grinch, is a green, repulsive individual who essentially nearly cancelled a holiday. So as silly as this acronym is, I like it because it helps me remember things about the Grinch. Like I just said, he's green, he's repulsive, he's an individual, and he nearly prevented Christmas from taking place. Now, other acronyms work in a very similar manner, in the same manner also. So let's have a look at another example, which might be a bit more familiar with those a bit older than my kids at the back. And so Watership Down, I'm sure it's a book or movie that most will be familiar with. And, what's Watership Down all about? Well, it's about when a terror emerges, rabbits seek home in peaceful domain that others would negate. And so, just with those two slides already, we've seen that books and movies may use acronyms, but other examples occur almost anywhere and everywhere. Now, my guess is that everybody is familiar with the REM abbreviation, Rapid Eye Movement, and likewise, I'm sure that others must have seen nurses wearing badges with RN entitled on the badge when visiting a hospital. And again, these acronyms and abbreviations, they're so commonplace, we use them as part of our everyday language. Like the two examples on the slide there, I'm sure if somebody said they wanted something ASAP or ASAP, I'm sure we would all know what they meant. And again, if I was to ask somebody where the nearest B&B is, I'm sure it would come as no surprise at all for what I was looking for. Now, many Bibles have abbreviations on their spines too, as this slide demonstrates. And if I was to say I was reading from the NIV, I'm sure you would know that I was reading from the New International Version. Throughout this talk tonight, all the references that I've used have been taken from the New King James Version, unless otherwise stated. So, continuing on our theme of acronyms and abbreviations, there's a whole number of religious acronyms too. And in my younger days, I remember I attended a youth weekend, and there were certain individuals there who were wearing bracelets with the acronym PUSH on them, pray until something happens. And others were wearing bracelets with the abbreviation WWJD. What would Jesus do? And then when I was preparing this talk, I found that PRAY acronym on the internet. Pray, pray until something happens. So we've had a look at various acronyms, but I thought I'd save the one that I like best till last. And this is the one on the screen, Prophecy. I remember flicking through a book one time, and this book was called The Way of Life. And when I thumbed to the second chapter, this amazing acronym that we can see on the slide was the one that caught my eye. So I'm going to use this acronym here as the basis for my talk this afternoon. And as we all know, my talk is entitled A Preaching Tool. And by using the PREACH acronym, we have a tool that can assist our memory. This can help us to preach, and not only that, it helps provide us with 6 convincing arguments that the Bible is true. And these 6 convincing arguments are prophecy, resurrection, environment, archaeology, consistency, and health laws. Okay, so with our PREACH acronym in mind, we're going to consider the P first, the P which stands for prophecy. And the Bible contains numerous prophecies, many about Israel, but certainly about other places too. And there are also several prophecies about Jesus. Fulfilled prophecies clearly indicate that the Bible must come from an everywhere present, all-powerful and all-knowing God. So let's spend a few minutes looking at some fulfilled prophecies. And the first prophecy that I'd like us to think about is that which is contained in Ezekiel chapter 37, where it's prophesied that Israel would be established or re-established as a united nation. In these verses on the slide, Ezekiel 37, verses 21 to 22, we have Ezekiel saying that one day God would bring back the separated children of Israel back to Israel. And at the time of Ezekiel 37, the children of Israel had divided themselves into 2 separate kingdoms. These 2 kingdoms were destroyed, and the vast majority of the children of Israel were taken into captivity. However, in 1948, the Jews reclaimed sovereignty as a united nation, one nation, and that nation being Israel. An earlier prophecy in Ezekiel 37 talked about Israel being brought back to life. In Ezekiel 37 and verses 10 to 14, we can read about Ezekiel and him seeing a vision of Israel. And this vision was seen as a collection of scattered dry bones. God tells Ezekiel in this vision that the bones, which were Israel, would be brought back to life. And as we saw from the previous slide, the Jews reclaimed and regathered Israel in 1948. The country of Israel had been brought back to life as Ezekiel had prophesied. And 1948 was only a few years after the end of the Holocaust. And during the Holocaust, about a third of the world's populations of Jews had been killed by the Nazis. The Bible contains many fulfilled prophecies about Israel in Ezekiel and elsewhere, and there are many detailed prophecies about other places too. And good examples of that are Babylon and Tyre. Isaiah 14 is one such place which contains a prophecy about Babylon, and it basically said that Babylon would be finally destroyed and reduced to swampland. Now, Babylon had been a world power at 2 different times in history. Cyrus had defeated Babylon in 539 BC, and the kingdom never again rose to power. And it was during the 1800s that archaeologists excavated Babylon, but some parts of the city couldn't be dug up. And they couldn't be dug up because they were under a muddy water table that had risen over the years. Prophecies about Tyre can be found in Ezekiel chapter 26 and also the first book of Amos. If we were to look at the Ezekiel verses 3 and 12, we would see that it was prophesied that Tyre would be attacked by many nations and that its stones, timber and soil would be cast into the sea. In verses 3 and 4, Ezekiel said that Tyre, which was the Phoenician Empire's most powerful city, would be attacked by many nations because of the way it had spoke against Israel. In 577 BC, Babylon began a lengthy attack on Tyre's mainland, and it's recorded that Alexander the Great conquered Tyre and ended the Phoenician Empire in 332 BC. In later times, Tyre fell under the rule of the Romans, Crusaders, and Muslims who destroyed the city again in 1291. In verse 12, Ezekiel states that Tyre's stones, timber and soil will be cast into the sea. Alexander the Great built a land bridge from the mainland to the island of Tyre, which I'm told still remains there to this day. An author said that Alexander took all the rubble from Tyre's mainland, tossed that into the sea, the stones, timber and all, and that was used to build the land bridge. Furthermore, Amos also details prophecy about Tyre, and it's here that the prophet says that God would cause Tyre's fortresses to fail as a punishment for the way that Tyre had treated Israel. The prophecy was fulfilled when Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, attacked the mainland of Tyre around 586 to 573 BC, and again in around 332 by Alexander the Great. And the land bridge that Alexander built was actually used to transport a battering ram, which was used to batter down the island's fortress. All of these prophecies we have looked at have been fulfilled as predicted, and this gives me confidence that other prophecies foretold in the Bible will also be fulfilled. I would like to end this short section on the prophecy by looking at some prophecies concerning Jesus. Now, Brother Tom read to us Isaiah 53 as our introductory reading, and I would like to compare passages from that chapter in Isaiah with passages from Matthew's Gospel. So as we can see in Isaiah, we speak about, prophecy about Jesus opening a gift, not his mouth. And then in Matthew, this was fulfilled. We read, he answered nothing. He answered him not one word. And again, Isaiah prophesies that Jesus would be despised and rejected by men. And in Matthew, we can see just that, with them stripping Jesus and putting a scarlet robe on him, putting on his head that crown of thorns, mocking him, spitting on him, striking him and leading him away to be crucified. And it continues, again in Isaiah, we were made aware that he was going to be numbered with the transgressors, and Matthew clearly tells us that 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on either side. And again in Isaiah, it said, it was prophesied that they would make his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death. And it's Matthew that records that, Jesus was taken away to lay in a tomb which belonged to Joseph, who was certainly a man of wealth. So these slides demonstrate how many events at the time of Christ's crucifixion were prophesied. Okay, so let's go back to our preach acronym, and let's consider the R for resurrection. The hope of all Christians lies in the fact that Jesus rose from the dead, and there's strong evidence that this occurred. The New Testament records of the resurrection were written during the lifetimes of people that were alive at the time, and such people would have obviously confirmed the accuracy of the account and indeed confirmed Jesus' appearances. Paul the Apostle writes about Christ's appearances after the resurrection, and he makes mention to the factual knowledge that Christ had been seen by more than 500 people at one time, and that the majority were still alive and could obviously be questioned. And Christ didn't only appear to friends and followers, but also to those who were hostile or unconvinced. And Saul is a great example of this. Saul despised Jesus and persecuted his followers. That is, up until Jesus appeared to him. And once Jesus had appeared to Saul, Saul became the Apostle Paul and a follower of Christ. The New Testament also provided the primary historical source of information on the resurrection, and as this slide shows, archaeological discoveries confirm accuracy. So many copies of the early New Testament manuscripts are known to be in existence today. So I think it's fair to consider that the New Testament is indeed a reliable source. If we were to turn to Acts and the first chapter and verse 3, we would read what's here on the slide. To them also he showed himself alive after his passion by many convincing demonstrations, appearing to them during 40 days and talking about the things of the kingdom of God. So these convincing demonstrations or infallible proofs would include the appearance of Jesus, the moved stone and the empty tomb. The Jews really wanted to stop the Christian movement, which they so easily could have done if they could have provided the body of Jesus. The tomb was under guard before the Roman soldier went missing too. The disciples' lives is perhaps the most telling testimony of all, though. The early Christians were stoned, they were beaten, they were thrown to the lions and crucified for preaching about the risen Christ. Laid down their own lives as the ultimate proof of their total confidence and the truth of their message. Such evidence helped convince many a skeptic and unbeliever that Christ did really rise from the dead. And I would like to conclude this section by quoting one of them. For my determined purpose is that I may know him, that I may progressively become more deeply and intimately acquainted with him, perceiving and recognizing and understanding the wonders of his person more strongly and more clearly, and that I may in that same way come to know the power outflowing from his resurrection, which he exerts over believers, and that I may so share his sufferings as to be continually transformed in spirit into his likeness even to his death, in the hope that if possible I may attain to the spiritual and moral resurrection that lifts me out from among the dead, even while in the body. Okay, back to our PREACH acronym, and we can see that that environment is going to be the next topic of consideration. I'm sure we can all picture beautiful environments, and I chose this slide because that just looks like a fantastic environment to me. We read in Isaiah 6 verse 3, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, the whole earth is full of his glory." And what a true statement this is. When we consider God's creation, we can clearly see evidence of design and evidence of an almighty creator. In the Psalms we read, "Great are the works of the Lord, they are pondered by all who delight in them." David was one such man who had thought about and delighted in God's creation. And I imagine it was David to have said these words in the bottom quote there, that the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. And I imagine David saying these words after he just looked up into the night sky. Again, there's ample evidence of a creator in our fine-tuned universe. Indeed, scientists state that there are over 65 parameters that must be fine-tuned for life to exist. So let's take a look at a few of these examples. The first being the Earth. If it was any closer to the sun, we'd be frazzled. I'm not sure if it was any further away, we'd be frozen. If the speed of light were any faster, then stars would be too luminous for life support, and vice versa. Water molecule alignment is important. If it's too much, water would vaporise too easily, and it wouldn't be any good for life. If it's too little, then the water wouldn't vaporise enough and ice wouldn't float, and this would lead to a big freeze-up issue. Science and biology again show amazing design, like the living cell. All life is made up of tiny cells, and these cells are way too small to see without a microscope. But if we were to look at a single cell under a microscope, it would look like a complex hive of activity. It would look pretty similar to what the slide is showing there. Now, in our human bodies, we can have as many as 100 trillion cells, and each cell has its very own program to do things like reproduce, or produce, or feed, or repair, or remove waste. The mitochondria, they're those kind of little squiggly looking things shown in that cell. They're like power stations, and they provide the energy for each and every cell. In the nucleus, that's that big circle looking thing in the middle, that's where a long DNA molecule exists. And the DNA contains all the instructions for the cell's work. DNA is like building blocks of life. And I really like the quote that I've put on this slide from this author called Mr. Denton, who says, "The complexity of the simplest known type of cell is so great that it is impossible to accept that such an object was thrown together by some kind of freakish, vastly improbable event. Such an occurrence would be indistinguishable from a miracle." Now, I remember when I was studying molecular biology at home, I bought a book called The Cell. And this book I bought, I kid you not, is about that thick, and it's that big. It's absolutely massive. It's really, really heavy. And this book is, it's about 1,300 pages long, and all it's talking about is a cell. It just blows my mind. And, that book is far from a simple read. And I'm sure if any one of you was to read it, and I'll say you don't mind lending it out, I can guarantee you all that you'd be impressed by the miracle of life, which is in each and every unseen cell, as revealed by science. Science relies on facts, and the fact that a simple cell is so complex points to a clear supernatural, superhuman creator using super skills and super intelligence. God's creation is strong evidence of his power and existence. The Bible, again, was way ahead of science with its scientific facts. Take this slide, for example. Isaiah here is talking about the circle of the earth, where for many years scientists, and some that I know, believed that the earth was flat. And this just made me giggle, but I remember reading somewhere that there are flat earth believers all around the globe, which just tickled me. Job refers to the constellations Pleiades and Orion as gravitationally bound star groups, and this fact wasn't learnt until the 19th century. I'd like to finish this section on environment with a quote from Paul in the Romans, who says, "For that which is known about God is evident to them and made plain in their inner consciousness, because God himself has shown it to them. For ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature and attributes, that is, his eternal power and divinity, have been made intelligible and clearly discernible in and through the things that have been made, his handiworks. So men are without excuse altogether, without any defence or justification." Paul is clearly telling the Romans that there is so much evidence that people really don't have an excuse if they don't believe it. Okay, back to our acronym once more, and we can see that archaeology is going to be our next discussion point. External evidence from both archaeology and historians, such as Josephus, confirm that the Bible is a trustworthy document. Many archaeological finds demonstrate the accuracy of Bible events and the accuracy of people and places mentioned in the Bible. Over 25,000 archaeological sites have confirmed the history recorded in the Bible. And so I figured we'd take a look at a few examples. John Ryland's papyrus is probably the oldest fragment of a New Testament manuscript. And this was found in Egypt and has been dated by papyrologists, if I pronounce that right, to 125 AD. And the smallest piece of papyrus contains verses from John's Gospel. This piece of New Testament manuscript was found in 1920. And up until then, critics were attempting to late date John's Gospel to the end of the 2nd century AD. Archaeological evidence soon put a stop to that attempt. Two professors from the University of Rome discovered what is now known as the Ebla tablets in northern Syria. And since 1974, so this is about 50 years or so, 17,000 tablets have been dug up. And up until this discovery, in kind of the mid-1970s, critics said that Abraham's victory over Chedorlaomer and the Mesopotamian kings was fictitious, and that the 5 cities of the plain were all legendary. But the Ebla tablets make reference to the 5 cities of the plain. They make reference to Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zor. And these are all described in Genesis chapter 14. And you know, one of the tablets actually cites all those cities in the exact same sequence as in Genesis 4 and verse 2. And these tablets provided evidence that once again the region was prosperous and successful, with a patriarchal culture which was consistent with the book of Genesis prior to the events that were recorded in chapter 14. If we were to look at 2 Kings 20, verse 20, and the parallel account in kind of 2 Chronicles 32, these give us an account of the construction of Hezekiah's water tunnel under Jerusalem by King Hezekiah, not long before the city was besieged by Sennacherib. Now, Hezekiah's pool was discovered in 1867, and one study site stated that this conduit and pool that were made by Hezekiah is absolutely certain now from the inscription that was found in the tunnel itself. Now, the inscription was discovered in 1880, and according to another site, it says it's undoubtedly the work of Hezekiah. And the inscription itself, it records the construction of the tunnel. It's written in Hebrew and is amongst the oldest extant record of its kind. Jeremiah 36 also provides an account that we can use. It records an account of the confident and personal scribe called Baruch, who took dictation from the prophet Jeremiah himself. And he had to hide with Jeremiah as King Jehoiakim sought to arrest them both. In the time of Jeremiah, when documents were sent to somebody, they would often be sealed with a clay seal which would bear the writer's name and title. Baruch's seal, as this one is known, was found in 1975, and looking at the lines, you know, the top line reads, belonging to Baruch. The second line, son of Neriah. And the third line, the scribe, the inscription, the third line says the scribe. Now all these characters you can see on there were written in the Hebrew alphabet. And just interestingly, I only found out last week that the Hebrew alphabet has just 22 letters, which I thought was interesting. But be that as it may, another piece of evidence we can look at is, well, at one time, critics would question the actual existence of a Roman governor with the name Pontius Pilate, who we know ordered Jesus' crucifixion. However, it was in June 1961 that an archaeologist uncovered this interesting limestone block shown on the slide. And this limestone block was found at an ancient Roman amphitheatre. And the inscription on here is in Latin this time. And this Latin inscription, which we can see there's like, or just about make out there's 4 lines, it gives the title of Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. And this is the only known occurrence of the name Pontius Pilate in any ancient inscription that I'm aware of. The high priest Caiaphas is known as the one who gave the unintentional prophecy that it was better for one man to die than for the nation to perish. Now, the tomb of Caiaphas was found in Jerusalem by accident in 1990. When archaeologists examined the tomb, this bone chest on the slide, they found an inscription on here. This inscription was in 2 places, in actual fact, and it read Caiaphas and Joseph, son of Caiaphas. Now, Josephus, who some of us might be familiar with, he's a Jewish historian. He gives the full name as Joseph, who is called Caiaphas of the high priesthood. And then, therefore, this tomb provides physical remains of an individual named in the Bible. And isn't it ironic, don't you think, that the man that pronounced Christ as deserving of death can be seen today as dry bones, while the man he accused left an empty tomb and now sits at the right hand of God? Okay, returning to this acronym once more, and we can see that our next topic of discussion is going to be that of consistency. The Bible was written by many different authors from various walks of life over a period of about 1,600 years. And despite this, the Bible message is consistent and it doesn't contradict itself. Even in little things, apparently trivial details, the Bible remains consistent. And this is, of course, what we would expect, knowing that the Bible is indeed the inspired word of God. So let's take a look at a few undesigned coincidences. And the first of which is when we consider the feeding of the 5,000. In John verse 6, we can see that Jesus asked Philip, and he asked Philip, he didn't ask anybody else, where they could buy bread. In Luke 9, we can see that they go to Bethsaida. And back in John, it's where we learn that Philip was from Bethsaida. So being from Bethsaida, surely Philip would be the person to ask, as he would know all about Bethsaida and where bread was going to be sold. Another example is when we consider the fact that there was no blacksmiths in Israel. 1 Samuel 13 tells us that, and it tells us it as clear as I stated it. It says that there was no blacksmith in Israel. And so it comes as no wonder when we look at Judges, and it's in Judges where we're informed that Ehud made his own dagger, and Shamgar killed many with an ox goad, and no shield or spear was among 40,000 in Israel. All these little things, again, providing us with convincing evidence. 1 Kings 15 and verse 27 clearly stated that the city of Gibbethon belonged to the Philistines in the reign of King Baasha of Israel. However, Joshua 21 verse 20 and 23 appear to contradict this statement, but a solution can be found in an apparently unrelated passage when we go to 2nd Chronicles. Because it was the Levites found themselves unemployed during the reign of Jeroboam, king of Israel, because he had rejected them as priests and set up a different form of worship for the people. The Levites therefore travelled to Judah, leaving their cities behind, taking the more faithful of Jeroboam's subjects with them. As a consequence, the Levitical cities were left empty. Gibbethon was one among these cities and became an easy conquest for the Philistines. So in each of these 3 Bible passages from different books of the Bible, the city of Gibbethon is mentioned in passing. But all 3 passages, however, can be combined, which gives us a clear and consistent history of the city. It can therefore be concluded that this is an accurate event of real events. Okay, so going back to our acronym for the final time, we can see that the final letter to be considered is H, and H is all about health laws. I'm sure many of you might already know that in the law of Moses there are several laws about hygiene and cleanliness, and these have been shown to have an impact on health. The children of Israel would not have known this at the time, so we have evidence that the Bible comes from a providing God. A fine example of this is sanitation. Inadequate sanitation can cause contamination, which can lead to all sorts of diseases such as typhoid, dysentery and cholera. And none of these diseases were a problem to the children of Israel, though, because the safe disposal of human waste by burial was commanded in the law. The law of Moses set provisions for preventing the spread of infection, and Leviticus provides a great example about washing contaminated items and bathing. And bathing would ensure that the risk of spreading infection would be greatly reduced. The law made provisions for those who had recovered after illness and detailed a 7-day respite period. The treatment of mothers who had just delivered was also covered in the law. And these provisions, in effect, would treat the individuals as potentially infectious. And if they proved to be, they would allow time for any disease to become evident. The law also covered any individuals who had contact with the deceased, and this can be read in Numbers chapter 19. And by applying the law of Moses to their way of life, the children of Israel greatly prevented the spread of infection. We know today that there's a clear link between poor housing and ill health. And I remember back in the days when I was a community nurse, I would often visit patients who clearly had poor quality housing, where their heating and ventilation was inadequate. And this was demonstrated by the damp and the mould and the odours. And the residents oftentimes were suffering with coughs and chest disease and general poor health and well-being. We've looked at a few examples of health laws from the Bible, and the law of Moses had many, many provisions, including isolation. It mentioned things about STDs and diet, food health and well-being. Only God could have written such laws many years ago before their scientific basis was known. And I would like to conclude this section with a passage of scripture which is taken from Deuteronomy chapter 4, which explains why the Bible was so much a book ahead of its time. Surely I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should act according to them in the land which you go to possess. Therefore be careful to observe them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has God so near to it, as the Lord our God is to us? For whatever reason we may call upon him. And what great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments as are in all this law which I set before you this day? Only take heed to yourself, and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, unless they depart from your heart all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and your grandchildren. So, by using this PREACH acronym, we remind ourselves that there are many examples to prove that the Bible really is the inspired Word of God. I've had a lot of fun using this acronym myself, and I'm sure you can all find many different examples that you could put into each and every one of the sections yourself and use for preaching. I hope this helps. Thank you.